Hello, I'm David Hunt. My guest today is a power player in the arts and beyond, and a really nice person as well, but we'll get to being a nice person a bit later. But listen to some of the things he's doing now or has achieved within the arts. He's currently the sub-editor of Arts Hub, a fantastic website. If you don't follow it, you've got to follow it because you really find out what's going on within the arts. Hosts a weekly show on 3RRR, an art show. He's done it for almost 20 years. Boy, he must be really old. It's called Smart Arts. Now listen to some of these. Founder of Emerging Writers Festival. Currently serves as chair of La Mama Theatre. Wow, that's so impressive. The volunteer committee. Also served as president of the Green Room Awards, was chair of a Melbourne Fringe Festival, co-founder of a Q&A, but it's not that Q&A, it's Queer and Alternative Night here in Melbourne, editor of a queer weekly newspaper called MCA, that's where I first met him, a life member of Queer Film Festival and Melbourne Fringe Living Legend. And he's just been presented with the Sydney Myer Arts Award. And the most important thing is that he started the Pink Magpies, which is the supporters group for the LGBTIQ community for Collingwood Football Club. Think arts in Melbourne, think Richard Watts. Think obsession about arts, think Richard Watts. Hello.
Hello, David. Thank you so much for that lovely intro.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for what you've done for the arts here in Melbourne. A lot of it is a volunteer, which is a big ask of you, and you continuously do things along the way. So I thank you as an arts lover that the work you've done is brilliant.
Thank you very much.
You as a kid, where?
So born in Bendigo on Dja Dja Wurrung country,
Right.
and then at a place called Big Hill Primary School, just outside of Bendigo.
That's a great name, isn't it? Big Hill.
But born in Bendigo itself. My dad was a primary school teacher and was kind of one of those restless people who after 3 or 4 years in a particular role or a particular place would get bored and we'd move. Mum was a high school teacher, and so I had a fairly kind of erratic childhood. I think I must have lived in about 12 or 13 homes by the time I was about 18 or 19.
Okay, is that tough? You know, like making new friends?
In retrospect, yes, and it's interesting that I've since had a conversation with my mum, kind of apologising for some of that, because it meant that, I was in grade prep at one school, I did grade 1, 2 and 3 at another school, 4, 5 and 6 at a different school, and then all 6 years at the one high school in Trafalgar. In some ways, I suspect some damage was done in my childhood in terms of kind of the challenge of making friends and letting people go and so forth. But kind of that's deep psychological stuff that maybe we don't need to get into.
Growing up in those country towns and moving around a lot, when did you realise that you might have been gay?
I guess, and again, this is trying to articulate the difference between that conscious realisation of kind of this is what gay means equals this is my own feelings and my own thoughts. Certainly, if I look back at some early photos of myself, kind of like, I think my sister got me dressed up in drag when I was kind of like 4 or 5.
Oh, really?
And I'm sure that my coming out was not a surprise to some people in my family and extended family. I was kind of very shy. My uncles tried to give me, they gave me a football one year for Christmas. They gave me a cricket set the next year, and I just kind of like went, what do I do with these? Chucked them aside and went back to reading a book. I was a voracious reader as a kid. So there's some of that, I guess, that side of things of kind of, which isn't necessarily gay identity, but not being comfortable with the trappings of a traditional kind of boy, if you like. Then really kind of consciously starting to, I think I must have been about 13 or 14 when I kind of went, I like boys. That means I'm a poofter, kind of, which at that stage kind of was a really
dirty word, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so there was a sense of recognising something shameful about myself, which I kind of tried to push away and hide away. But simultaneously, I think both my parents were members of the ALP. They were involved in the union movement. They were kind of lefty ratbag kind of in.
But that's a teacher, though, isn't it? In a lot of ways. But well, back then, not so much now, but back then, yeah.
And so and I think I got some of that that kind of left-wing politics, that kind of staunch kind of values about independence and standing up for yourself. So despite the fact that I felt qualms about my kind of sexual identity, I also found ways I could channel some confidence and some independence. And watching Brideshead Revisited when I must have been in year 8, I think, year 8 or 9, so about kind of, say about 14. I was so enamoured of the character of Sebastian Flight carrying a teddy bear and wearing like a white cardigan draped over his shoulders.
That was so gay.
Yeah. I turned up to school the next day with carrying a teddy bear.
What? Whoa.
And then a couple of years later, by the time I got to...
Did you get beaten up then?
Oh, constantly. I was... and in some ways, I think being beaten up kind of forced me to confront people in a way which then became a habit later in life. But in high school, yes, year 7, year 8, year 9, I was bullied constantly. I was thrown against lockers. I was punched. There's 2 schoolyard fights I remember quite vividly. One in which somebody tried to fight me behind the bike sheds, and I just kind of walked away, and the kid was like, "Why won't you fight me?" And my sister said, "Because he'll get punished." If Richard gets into a fight, he'll get told off by mum and dad, for getting in trouble. And the other kids were like, "That's weird. Your parents don't let you fight. What kind of weird childhood is this?" And then the other really significant moment was year 9 metalwork class. I was being pushed around. I think there was sulfuric acid in tubs, and we were doing enamel work, and this kid was really, it could have been a disaster.
Yes.
And I just snapped, I just lost it, and I was like, right, I'll meet you behind the metalwork sheds at lunchtime and we'll have a fight. And I was the one who actually challenged him. And in my memory, it's like half the school were there. It's probably like 20 or 30 kids in a circle to watch us fight.
Oh, wow.
And this guy swung a punch, and I just stood there and let him hit me. And he was like, "Why won't you fight back?" And I was like, "Well, because this fight won't solve anything. You're bigger and stronger than me. You'll punch me. I'll fall down and cry. You'll still hate me. This won't solve anything." And he just looked really confused and walked away.
But that was a bit ballsy and very sort of growing up of you at that age.
It kind of says something about who I was as a kid. I devoured books. I was a precocious kid, and clearly, I think, a cocky and precocious teenager as well. But also there was something that something snapped in me in the metalwork class, and I just went, I'm not going to take this shit anymore. And being able to stand up to this bully and just say, your tactics will not work on me, really it was some kind of psychological kind of tactic. I don't know how and why I did that, but I did, and it kind of worked because from that stage, because he was one of the worst bullies in my class.
Right, yeah.
Once he kind of stopped picking on me, other kids stopped picking on me as well, and then the next year I got cast as Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and the first school musical our school had done, and all the other kids were like, "Okay, he's weird, but at least we now know he's good at something. He can sing and he's entertaining. Maybe we'll stop hitting him now."
Wow. But what about the teddy bear, taking that? Were there other things that you did that might have made the kids go, what's going on here?
By the time I was in year 12, and I turned 17 halfway through year 12, I started school early. I should have started school when I was 5.5, but I started when I was 4.5 because my dad was the principal of the country high school and just fudged the date. Because my birthday's in July, so I should have started school the next year. Yeah, my 17th birthday, my sister took me to get my hair permed for my birthday, and I started wearing makeup, and I started wearing pink and grey and that kind of new romantic kind of look with a bit of a Boy George influence. And I turned up to school with eyeshadow and eyeliner, and instead of plucking my eyebrows because I ran out of patience, I shaved half of them off, much to my father's outrage. He literally walked into the bathroom and was like, "Where are the rest of your effing eyebrows?" I was like, "Dad, they're in the sink. Can't you see what I'm doing?" And I think similarly there was that sense of pushing back, if you challenge a bully before they can challenge you, by being, perhaps it's the same thing that drag queens have learned over the years. Part of it's about creating a mask and allowing yourself to be larger and more confident than you are. And it's also just about kind of preemptive attack. By wearing makeup and challenging them, kind of people would go, "Oh, you're a poofter," and I can go, "Yes, I am. What's the problem? What's the point?"
Yeah.
Kind of like it was me saying, "I'm queer, deal with it," even before the word queer was part of my vocabulary.
Was that the trigger for your parents? Did they ask you, or did you have to come out to them?
In retrospect, they clearly knew what was going on. They were teachers, and they were friends with the teachers at my own high school. So they must have been getting reports on what I was doing. I came out to my classmates in Year 12 as bisexual.
Right.
And this is, I think, there were about 16 kids in our class. Largest Year 12 class my high school, Trafalgar High, had ever had at that point. So word must have got back to them, but I did not come out to my parents officially until a couple of years later.
Interesting schooling. You left school. What did you do?
So I finished Year 12 and I moved at the end of 84. January 85, I moved out of home at 17. I moved into a share house in Moe.
Why Moe? Why not Melbourne?
Didn't know anybody in Melbourne. Literally did not know anybody. And I had friends who already lived in Moe. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in high school. And the local D&D club was based in Moe. And a couple of us moved, well, 5 of us, in fact, moved into a share household together. There were only 3 bedrooms. So the guy who had a job had his own bedroom, and the other 4 of us, 2 boys per room. That only lasted for about 6-7 months before a couple of guys moved out, and I got work. Afterwards, when I moved to Melbourne, about a year and a half later, soon Moe became infamous for the murder of the toddler, Jaden Lesky, and kind of a pig's head through a window and drug deals. And Moe was the first place that I came very, very close to getting poofter-bashed. And it's the reason I left Moe was because the local kind of the Moe sharps, effectively, the local kind of gang, followed me home from the shops, and one of them forced his way into our house.
Oh, no.
And was going to beat me up because I was queer. My female flatmate said, "No, this is my boyfriend, get the fuck out of our house." But it was about that time I went, Moe is not safe for me.
No.
I need to leave, I need to move to... And that's when I moved to Melbourne, just after I'd turned 18.
And how was that move? You know, like, what was it like for coming from a country town to a city like Melbourne, you know, like, which was, even back then, a pretty large city?
It was good and bad. I kind of went back into the closet when I moved to Melbourne for a while, partially because I didn't know any other queer people. I'd started to get involved with a queer support group in the Latrobe Valley, the Gippsland Gay Support Group, joined just before I turned 18. The friends that I moved in with, I knew through Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. They didn't know I was queer. I kind of shut down my sexuality, I think, for about the first year and a half I lived in Melbourne, because it just didn't feel safe. And also it was the early years of the AIDS pandemic. And to me, at that stage, I think probably like a lot of kind of young gay men, kind of AIDS equaled death and having sex equaled AIDS. And so I was just like, right, I'm not going to have sex until there's a cure. That kind of obviously didn't last that long, thankfully. Otherwise, I'd still be a virgin. Flip side of that is moving to Melbourne, I also discovered punk rock and kind of alternative music and that thriving Melbourne independent band scene, which kind of was very much a kind of entry point for me to contemporary arts practice.
So here you are, a big reader, love the, like the punk movement, performed Joseph's Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, as Joseph, obviously. Here you go, you're getting into the arts. So what was the first real move into the arts for you when you got to Melbourne?
Probably through live music and friends in bands. I had very good friends with all of the band members. And I'd started writing poetry, quite bad poetry. And one of my mates in a band said, "Oh, get up and read some of your poems at one of our gigs."
Right.
Which I did. Then that started to evolve and I started doing organising kind of performance poetry and spoken word nights with bands, doing more kind of, went from kind of poetry to spoken word in inverted commas, which was kind of more political, more more articulate, and sometimes I would perform it with bands, sometimes I would perform it at poetry readings and elsewhere. It started to build momentum. I got invited to support Jello Biafra, kind of the kind of dead Kennedy's lead singer, who by that stage had a spoken word career.
Yep.
So I supported him on an Australian tour in Melbourne. I did 2 gigs with him at the Universal Theatre in Fitzroy, which sadly no longer exists, and the National Theatre in St Kilda. The band Bikini Kill, I did some spoken word support for them. Propagandy, another punk band. And because I was doing spoken word quite regularly, I knew bands, I knew other poets and spoken word performers and musicians and artists. I got invited to come in for a chat by the then artistic director of Next Wave Festival, Campion Descent.
Yep.
And I literally thought I was coming in for a chat and he wanted to pick my brain about some poetry or something like that, or some artists he should program. He then turned around and offered me a gig. He offered me work.
Fantastic.
So I was the tech coordinator for the kind of text and spoken word program for the Next Wave Festival.
Just explain to people that might not know what the festival is.
So Next Wave, at that stage, we're talking, this is kind of 98, 99. Next Wave was a festival for emerging artists at that stage, officially artists under 25.
Yep.
The festival's evolved since then, but at that stage it was still very much a fairly Melbourne-centric festival. There was an argument at one stage that it should actually merge with Melbourne Fringe, for example. That was resisted, and I think that's a good thing. Next Wave is now much more focused on contemporary arts practice and kind of more cutting-edge emerging arts practice. But yeah, so that was my first official kind of entry point into the arts industry.
Obviously, you were writing there, but where did it really start for you? You know, because you're known as a journalist. Where did it really start? You know, like, were you starting to write reviews about bands? Or?
Yeah, I was, and that goes back to, we need to jump back a few years. So when I moved to Melbourne in '86, I was working in the public service, and that's how I moved from Moe to Melbourne. I just applied for a new job in the public service and got that. After about 4 or 5 years in the public service, I quit. I didn't have any job prospects at that stage. I was just like, I quit, I can't do this anymore, what will I do next? And I saw an ad in the Melbourne Star Observer, it would have been at that stage, I think. That was at the time when Melbourne Star Observer and Brother Sister were the 2 newspapers. And there was an ad for the receptionist position at the Victorian AIDS Council. So I started working at the AIDS Council, which at that stage was in Johnston Street in Collingwood in '89. And in my spare time at that job, particularly I worked, for example, on Monday nights I worked till 9 o'clock at night, and Monday nights were fairly quiet, and I would that's where I started writing, sitting at the receptionist's desk at the AIDS Council in Collingwood in my spare time, writing out short stories longhand, writing out poetry longhand. And because I was starting to see bands, and because I'd also started to pick up some part-time work as a DJ, in kind of goth and industrial clubs around the same time, the editor of Beat magazine just got in touch and said, I need somebody to review this kind of goth compilation album. You know punk music and goth music. I'm told you can write. Can you write a review for me? And that really where the kind of my arts journalism started.
Did you get paid?
No.
Because it was all free then,
like a
wasn't
lot of
it?
people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, there's a lot of argument now about kind of working for free. My theories, and it's something the journalist and author Andrew Masterson kind of spoke to me about, his advice was, everybody starts out working for free, effectively, whether you're doing something as a volunteer that leads to paid work, or whether you are consciously saying, I will write for free and building up a portfolio, and then kind of you start getting paid work. If you're still writing for free after about 5 years, you're being exploited, and you should probably be more proactive. But I started out kind of effectively writing in return for free theatre tickets, free CDs, free concerts, and that was where I cut my teeth as a writer, and and that's where I learned about deadlines and the importance of meeting word count and so forth.
And Beat as well was, like the first street paper here, and then Impress followed, and it was very basic and very edgy from what I remember the days when I moved to Melbourne. It was upstairs in a pub, being that's where it all the lifeline was. You were part of something that was very new and different. And
plugged into something that, because in those days pre-internet, the street press was how you found out about gigs, tours. It was the combination of the street press, Beat and Impress, and posters and flyers kind of were so critical and so important. Now all that's through Facebook. But because I was writing for those papers, I was getting kind of sent along to review gigs and so forth. foundational, really, in my career as an arts journalist.
So when did you go over to Gay Press?
The club that I was running, Q&A, Queer and Alternative, which we'd set up at the end of 1995, very late 95, at what is now Max Watts in the city, but back then was called Wall Street, and then became the Hi-Fi Bar. So I was already running a goth industrial club called Apocalypse at that stage.
Oh, great name.
Myself and the other promoters, it was fortnightly.
Yep.
I lie. Apocalypse was weekly, then it became Abyss, which was fortnightly. We needed something on the other Saturday night. And myself and a couple of friends, John and Pete, set up Q&A. A mutual friend, Helen, who I was already DJing with, put me in touch with Peter. And she was like, okay, so Pete likes indie, and Richard, you like rock. And you both don't like gay clubs because you don't like the music, you don't like the culture. You should start your own club. And so we did, thinking that Q&A would, literally I remember thinking, if this runs for 6 weeks to 3 months and only our friends come, it will be fun, and that's all that matters. And it ended up running for almost 12 years.
Wow.
And in the early days of Q&A, after we moved to the Builders Arms in early 96, and that's when Q&A took off. And suddenly there were queues out the door and down the street.
Fantastic.
And our timing was coincidental, but that's when kind of alternative music just suddenly exploded, kind of post-Nirvana, all of that. And suddenly we went, oh, there's all these other queer kids who like punk and grunge and Britpop and indie and rock and don't want to listen to house music and high-energy disco. And also, we advertised the club as kind of a place for straight people to bring their queer friends, queer people to bring their straight friends, and we said the dress code was dress up, down or sideways. So it was pretty eclectic and pretty crazy. And I'm not a kind of sophisticated DJ who beat mixes things or anything like that. I was just like, right, here's a Nirvana track, and then follow that up with a Nine Inch Nails
Scratch,
track.
you're like, or the needle doesn't
gently
quite.
cross-fading kind of badly and awkwardly. Pete was a much more sophisticated and kind of, he was technically a great DJ. Q&A became really successful, and the then editor of Melbourne Star Observer, which later became kind of eventually morphed into Melbourne Community Voice, MCV. The editor at that stage was like, well, clearly other queer people like this weird music that you listen to, Richard, so you should probably write a column for us. Kind of my introduction to gay and lesbian journalism, as it was at that stage in Melbourne, was writing an alternative music column that was just called Alternatively, and it ran on the same page. I think it was John Donnan who was doing kind of more pop music reviews. So there'd be 2 columns with different styles of music. And over time, the editor went, oh, kind of, Richard can write, let's get him to do an interview. Let's get him to write a feature. Let's get him to write an article. And then eventually I became first the news editor, and then the editor of MCV. And very consciously, when I became editor, I'd become involved in queer politics. I tried to set up a Melbourne branch of the New York group Queer Nation, and that was around the time the word queer was kind of like, I remember when the Melbourne Gay and Lesbian Film and Video Festival, as its original title was, changed to the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. The festival got letters from people saying, I do not identify as queer. Queer is an insulting word, an ugly word. I will never come back to the festival while it has that name. It still has that name kind of over 20 years later. But
they're right, in a way, as well. But there was no other word, was there?
And queer was an act of reclamation. And for me, importantly, queer, particularly in the 90s, queer was not a blanket term to describe gay and lesbian. And I used to describe queer as the people whose identities fit into the gaps between gay and lesbian and bisexual. If you don't feel, because gay, particularly for me in the 90s, gay was as much a social construct, a social identity, as it was a sexual identity. And if you did not have the right haircut, the right kind of body by going to the gym, the right clothes, listen to the right music, or have the right attitude, the gay community felt very kind of, I did not feel comfortable. I didn't really identify as gay. My sexuality involved sleeping with men and falling in love with men, but
you weren't part of the stereotype.
I wasn't part of the gay culture, per se. And so queer culture felt like something I could own and belong to, because by that stage, I had a mohawk, and I was kind of, as I said, doing spoken word at punk gigs and stuff like that. I felt too punk for the gay scene and too gay for the punk scene, and I kind of forged out this kind of identity somewhere in the middle, which is when I started creating a fanzine. I found out about a movement in the US called queercore, kind of like hardcore, but for queers.
Yeah.
And so I did a fanzine, and I met other queer punks, and Q&A was set up around the same time.
Yeah.
And now queer, kind of the word queer has lost its edge a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
It's been appropriated as well, as just a blanket term for the broader identity. But queer, I still love the word queer.
Okay. I'm never sure with it, actually, but I use it all the time, but I'm never really sure. So here you are, getting a reputation. The gay press sort of disappeared, and as most other like newspapers have as well. But you get so involved with like the Fringe Festival. You had great involvement there, didn't you?
After Next Wave, I started working for a youth arts organisation, Express Media, as their artistic director. They publish a magazine called VoiceWorks for writers under 25. It's a fantastic magazine where people like Benjamin Law and plenty of other writers kind of cut their teeth when they were younger. And when I was the AD of Express Media, the board of Melbourne Fringe got in touch and said, kind of, we want somebody who knows the youth arts sector. I think I was about 30 at the time. And they said, can you come and sit on the board? So I did. I eventually became deputy chair. And then when the chair resigned, I became the chair of Melbourne Fringe for about 3 years. And
how was that? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, there were some rocky moments.
Yeah.
There were challenges. There always are. In any arts organisation, when kind of there's not enough funding to do the job properly, and there's kind of there can always be tensions as well. But I learnt an enormous amount about kind of the Australian arts sector more generally. I saw so much amazing, great work. And previously my arts involvement, had been live music and spoken word. And then kind of being involved on the board of Fringe opened up the doors to contemporary circus and independent theatre and cabaret and contemporary dance. And kind of that's now the world I fully inhabit.
Yeah, and the Fringe Festival back then, it's gone a little bit mainstream now, and a lot of comedians are jumping in as part of the Fringe Festival, because it was supposed to have been, something that you were seeing for the first time and a bit edgy. I miss the fact that it's not like that. Like the Fringe Festival in Adelaide, it's so commercial now in a lot of ways.
And I would argue that I think there was a period where the Fringe was starting to be dominated by some of the larger commercial kind of comedians and so forth. And I think the Fringe has successfully kind of pivoted and adapted and moved away from that, and plays a really strong role in artistic development now as well. Instead of Fringe just being a festival that happens in September, October, for example, Fringe artistic development programs run throughout the year. So I think Melbourne Fringe occupies a different place in the arts ecosystem to Adelaide Fringe, which is kind of this year very different because there were no international artists there. But I think Melbourne Fringe still is a really critical part of the arts kind of ecology.
Absolutely, and it should stay the way it is. It doesn't need to become that commercial as the Adelaide one. Now, I love the fact that your involvement with La Mama. It's such an institution here in Melbourne, isn't it? La Mama Theatre.
La Mama is so important, and not just in Melbourne. When the fire happened at La Mama Theatre a couple of years ago, when the Faraday Street Theatre burnt down, within 24 hours I was fielding calls from literary organisations saying, La Mama is important not just to the theatre community, but it's important to writing in Australia. It's where the Australian voice kind of became kind of like, not established, it was already there, but kind of the La Mama in the 70s played such a key role in developing the Australian vernacular and the Australian voice in the arts. I was fielding calls from Perth, from people saying, I'm an independent actor in Perth, can I hold a fundraiser for La Mama? La Mama matters to the whole country. And so being the chair of La Mama is, it's an enormous privilege and a huge responsibility as well to support the staff after the fire, and then after losing our Australia Council funding as well was a huge blow. But then the outpouring of support we got after the fire, and the outpouring of support we got after the losing our Australia Council funding as well, letters, phone calls, donations and support. The Melbourne philanthropic community rallied. After the fire, the then Minister for the Arts, Martin Foley, let me know that the state government would support our rebuilding campaign.
Fantastic.
I was expecting $300,000, $500,000. We got $1 million from the state government.
Wow.
And then 5 different philanthropic groups then matched that donation with $200,000 each. So that's another kind of million.
Yeah.
Then we raised another, I think, 1.2 million from the general public to rebuild the theatre, and we're reopening later this year.
And isn't that the wonderful thing about Melbourne? That it really is it's for a big city, it's so community-based, isn't it? And we're lucky with the government that we've got in power right now because they support the arts.
I think they'd have to support it in some ways because it's so important here. But certainly, yeah, I think in the upcoming state budget, there's an extra $288 million for the arts. That's the figure off the top of my head, but I think it's somewhere around there. So yeah, we are very lucky. But community in Melbourne is so established, and I think I'd love to know, it's a chicken or egg situation. Which came first, community media, radio, TV, newspapers, or the sense of community that is so present in Melbourne? I think they kind of grew up and they built each other up together.
They did, and that was going to be my next question is, why is Melbourne such an arts hub and known around the world, and people come here going, I've heard about Melbourne, what is it? And it is to do with community, but why do people move from other cities of Australia to come here because it's such a hub?
I think there's 2 factors at play there. The fact, as you've said, people move here from interstate. So Melbourne has a kind of a magnetic pull. If you're an independent artist in Perth or a young kind of arts graduate in Adelaide or regional Victoria, for example, you move to Melbourne because there's already an established scene here. Going back to Express Media, when I was there as AD, that's when we set up the Emerging Writers Festival. And I remember speaking to a young poet from Perth who we'd flown over to appear at the festival in its first year. And he was kind of caught in the horns of a dilemma. Did he stay in Perth, where there was no established poetry scene, very little in the way of poetry readings, very little in the way of festivals to support young and emerging writers? He came to Melbourne and was like, you've got a whole bookshop dedicated to poetry, collected works, this isn't fair. So he had the choice, did he stay in Perth and invest 50% of his creative energy in establishing the opportunities that exist in Melbourne, which meant only having 50% capacity to write? Or did he move to Melbourne and devote himself 100% to writing because the networks and the structures were already in place? So Melbourne steals artists from other cities. Or steal is not necessarily the right word. Sometimes we do. It's easier to make art here because those structures already exist. I think the geography of Melbourne plays a part as well. It's so much easier to get around, unlike Sydney, where you've got this ruddy great harbour kind of constantly in the way, and Sydney, there are smaller pockets and communities don't mix as much. In Melbourne, it's much more open and it mixes. And historically, there's something about Melbourne as well. I remember years ago, a friend at Triple R interviewing the then Labor member for Melbourne. This is before the Greens won the seat for the first time. And she was holding him to account as a politician, saying, why are you not as progressive in your politics as Melbourne is as progressive in its politics? And he said, the thing you have to remember is that the rest of Australia is America and Melbourne is Cuba. This is the most left-wing, socially progressive city in the country.
Okay.
Historically, one nation has always had its smallest kind of number of votes in Victoria generally, and Melbourne particularly. So Melbourne for decades has been adventurous, progressive, left-wing, and it has supported the arts as a result. The Melbourne Fringe Festival, for example, predates the Melbourne International Arts Festival, which in other cities, the Fringe springs up because there's an international festival,
of course,
and the local artists feel ignored and left out, and so they start a Fringe. That's what happened in Adelaide. That's what happened in Edinburgh. In Melbourne, there was a Fringe before there was a festival to be a Fringe of, because Melbourne artists had come back from Adelaide and gone, half the artists in Adelaide are from Melbourne. We need a Fringe here, so they created one. So Melbourne has a can-do kind of energy about it. It has a community energy. Jonathan Holloway, the former artistic director of Melbourne Festival, when he came to the city, he spent 6 months before he started programming, trying to get to know the personality of Melbourne. And I remember him talking about the fact that Border Force had announced that they would be patrolling the streets of Melbourne and asking people for their papers to prove that they weren't illegal immigrants. Within 2 or 3 hours, there were thousands of people on the street protesting that, and Border Force's activity was cancelled. And Jonathan was saying that would not have happened in any other Australian city. It's that palpable sense of community that I think is so key to Melbourne's identity.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that drives the arts, that you move to Melbourne to become part of an artistic community.
Talking about community and volunteering, and that's what you do so much within the arts. Why do you keep on doing it, Richard? What is it?
Sometimes I don't know the answer to that question. I do it because it's part of who I am. It probably, part of it is that kind of childhood experience of having kind of left-wing, active unionist kind of parents who were themselves involved. It's about community good. It's about, I believe passionately in leaving the world a better place than I found it.
Yep.
And trying to make, trying to support people, trying to build up connections for people. Part of that is why I do my radio show on Triple R, for example. I know that, and I'm sure it's the same for you at Joy, for example, you can give publicity and support to artists who would otherwise never get interviewed by the mainstream media outlets. And in doing so, you are then kind of strengthening their careers and helping them advance themselves artistically and creatively. You're bringing audiences into their orbit who would otherwise never hear of them. And that kind of collective action is what makes the world a better place.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And you're not doing it for self, like with myself as well. You're doing it for the good of the community and good of the arts community as well.
If there weren't volunteers in the arts sector would kind of fall apart. Or ticket prices would be 15 times more higher because they need to employ more people to make the work. So, and also I do it because I love the art. Art is an expression, a distillation of what it means to be human. Art is an empathy machine that teaches us how to think and how to feel and how to walk in somebody else's shoes. And if we did not have art, and when I say the art, I mean everything. I mean the visual arts, literature, theatre, dance, circus, kind of video work, contemporary experimental practice that makes my mind boggle. If we didn't have that, the world would be a colder, crueler, less caring place. And if we want art to thrive, we need to support it.
I mentioned a few awards that you've got, and you deserve them. But there's one in particular that's just recently given to you. A bit of a big deal, isn't it?
In March last year, just before the pandemic hit and everything went crazy, I was presented with the Sydney Myer Performing Arts Award Facilitator Prize, which was lovely, partially because it included $25,000. Which means for the first time in my life, I'm not living paycheck to paycheck.
Fantastic.
I have money in the bank for the first time. I've paid off most of my debts, not all of them, and there's still money left over to hopefully go travelling again when you can.
But what does it mean to you, Richard, that such a prestigious award was given to you? Social media went crazy, with saying, how wonderful it is that you got the award. It must be, all of a sudden, all this hard work that you've done for the arts community and the general community, it must be so nice to, receive that award apart from the money, just the recognition.
It was incredibly humbling. It was, and the thing that's fascinating about the Facilitator's Prize, and several friends who work in the arts sector have also received the same prize. It's an acknowledgement of work that goes on behind the scenes. So Annette Downs, who lives down in Tasmania, works with an organisation, Tasmania Performs. She's won the Facilitator's Prize for her commitment and support and nurturing of artists. Daniel Clarke, the former artistic director of Theatre Works in St Kilda, was at Arts Centre Melbourne for several years thereafter and has just recently moved up to Sydney. He has won the same prize. And to know that I'm in the same company it means a lot. And it was voted on by a panel of peers from the arts sector, from people from Adelaide and Perth. And the fact that people in Adelaide and Perth know my work is humbling and gratifying and rewarding, and it was a thrill. If nothing else, it was nice to be able to say, all those times I've kind of struggled to pay the rent because I work in the arts sector, as opposed to going, oh, bugger it, I'll just take a really high-paying job in kind of the commercial sector or something like that. I've made the right decisions. They may not have always been easy decisions, but it was an acknowledgement of that, I guess. And like I say, yeah, it was humbling and kind of deeply gratifying.
Richard Watts, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Overdue. We should have done this a few years ago, but we've got it now. So thank you.
My absolute pleasure.
And that's another show for Ben TV. I'm David Hunt, and we'll see you again real soon.